Many people are entranced by the wonders of archaeology when they learn about the pyramids of Giza, or the Parthenon from ancient Greece. I had my first taste of archaeology from similar venues, but the first time archaeology felt tangible to me, the moment I knew I would become an archaeologist, was in my freshman year of college. I was attending a small community college, and due to registering late, found myself in an Intro to Physical Anthropology course. I had never heard of anthropology before, but the course satisfied my non-lab science requirement for my computer science degree, and it fit my work schedule. The course was tough, so when the opportunity arose to boost my grade with some extra credit, I took it. Watching a documentary on Netflix about archaeology seemed like a piece of cake. And that documentary changed my life. The Cave of Forgotten Dreams is a documentary about the Chauvet Cave in southern France, which has some incredibly preserved cave art, some of which was painted by human hands over 30,000 years ago. As the scientists recreate how the paintings were made and how they were meant to be seen, chills ran through me. This was a magic I wanted to be part of. I think of that film often, and while caves sucked me into the field of archaeology, my work has yet to bring me into the dark depths of a cave. I sat down with the professor who, almost 4 years ago, assigned that film as extra credit to talk to her about her experience as an archaeologist working in caves. So let's start by you telling me your name and background. Yeah.
Valerie Haskins, and I'm an archaeologist, and I've been working at Sudi Adirondack for 23 years, I guess. I do both archaeology and bioarchaeology.
Tell me about what you went to grad school for and how you were approached to do the first cave you worked in.
Okay, sucked into it.
Okay, sucked into it is just about right. Okay, when I went to Washington University in St. Louis for my graduate work, and I think it's important to keep in mind I didn't have an undergraduate degree in anthropology. I never took any anthro courses. I'd been interested in the medical aspect for a long time and what you could learn from human remains because of a work I had done with a law firm and working with contemporary forensic remains. On the other hand, I also spent my junior year studying abroad and got really fascinated with archaeology, working in Greece and Egypt. So once I got out of undergraduate, I started taking extra courses, and this was in the early 80s, and figured out early on that I wanted to do archaeology, but I wanted to work with human remains. And at that point, that was a very new field. In fact, Jane Bykster, who became one of my mentors, is the one who came up with that term, bioarchaeology. So one of my early things I did was do a field school with Jane, and that solidified that I wanted to work with human remains. So when I went to graduate school at Washington U in St. Louis, I was working primarily with Patty Jo Watson, and I knew that I wanted to work with human remains, but it's not like ceramics or stone tools or something where you can just go to a museum and find out what the collections are. And if I was going to work with human remains, you have to get them somehow. And I asked her, what do you think? It was at a Christmas party my first year, and said, I'm looking for a project to do for my master's thesis. I want to incorporate archaeology and human remains, and do you have any ideas? And she said to me, I have 4 words for you: pit of the skulls. And this had been after a couple of beers. So I thought, that sounds awesome. That's great. That's a great idea. Pit of the skulls. That sounds really exciting. And I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. And so what I later found out is that was a cave in west central Kentucky that you had to rappel into that had human remains that were deposited theoretically in prehistory. We didn't even know at that point. And they became the focus of my master's thesis. So when Pat asked me to work on those remains, I said, okay. So then that next summer, she was teaching a cave archaeology course and asked me to be her TA. And she said, you've been in caves before, haven't you? And I lied. And I always say, you guys heard me say this a million times, first thing you learn in graduate school is to lie, because if they ask if you can do it and your funding's dependent upon it, you say, yes, of course I can do that. So I said, sure. And the reality was, I'm from Missouri originally, and I'd been in Mark Twain's Hannibal Cave with a guide and the lights and everything, which is a whole different thing than real, actual, wild caving. So Pat took me on my first big caving trip, and we were deep in Mammoth Cave. We'd been underground a couple of hours at that point, several miles back in the cave, and we were doing a belly crawl that was, a few hundred feet. It was like 2 football fields lengths on our bellies. And it was so narrow that my helmet didn't quite fit. And I had to take that off. And she turned to me and said, it was just the two of us. She turned to me and said, we're lost. I'll come back for you. Don't panic. And then she left. Right? She left. And before she left, she said, you probably want to turn your light off, because at that point we were using carbide light and you had to have enough fuel, right? We had backup lights, we had candles, we always had flashlights, but our primary fuel was carbide, and you needed water and carbide, and she didn't know how long she was going to be gone, so she said, turn your light off. So I'm laying there in the dark for like 45 minutes, where it was so narrow I couldn't even have my helmet on, listening to the blood go through my ears and thinking, how have I gotten here? What did I'm just an archaeologist, I worked on Native American sites. I had no idea that I'd find myself, hundreds of feet back into Mammoth Cave, very deep underground, and not even knowing how I got there and what I'd gotten myself into. But I loved it, and I still wonder if Pat had just been around the corner and was watching me to see if I would panic. But she eventually did come back for me, and I learned a great deal about what to do. It became apparent to her very quickly that I really didn't know what I was doing, because again, carbide light is a live flame, and I have a little pinhead, so I had to keep my helmet on. I had a sweatshirt crammed up there, and I don't know what else, a couple bandanas to keep it on, and I was trying to light my lamp, and I caught my hair on fire and burned off some of my hair, and part of singed my eyebrows. And that's when Pat looked at me and said, you really haven't done this before, have you? I said, well, not quite like this, which was quite an exaggeration. But what was fascinating about that, I stuck to it. And what I found is that I loved cave archaeology. It's completely different than anything else I'd ever done in my life. It's mystical, it's physical, it's quiet, it's your imagination, really goes wild. You feel like you're on the trail of people who might have been 4,000 years before you or 400 feet in front of you. It felt the same. You felt like you could see people out of the corner of your eye, and you were looking at exactly what they saw and looking at it in the same manner they did. And as archaeologists, we don't get that opportunity to really kind of get inside someone's mind and see what they saw, because nothing had changed since they left their literal wet footprints in the clay and the ashes from their cane torches. It was all still there. So you could see exactly what they were doing, wondering what they were thinking. And because the preservation was so good, we had different data than you would ever get on the surface.
Preservation in caves happens under such specific conditions that it allows the wildest things to be preserved, like footprints that are literally still wet thousands of years later, a wooden splinter from a cane torch, or a delicate woven grass sandal. One of the factors that creates these conditions is the constant temperature. Deep underground, caves aren't subjected to the changing of seasons or even the cycles of night and day, which allows for a more stable environment. There are fewer organisms back in caves to disturb any human activity. Archaeological sites in caves are like time capsules because of their preservation.
And when I finally did get to work on my master's, I worked with 16 different caves, including Pit of the Skulls. It was only one of the 16. and surveyed them, learned how to do all of that work, how to analyze the human remains as well as animal remains, because these bodies were deposited in prehistory down vertical shafts. And so as people decomposed, there were animals that were in those shafts as well. So I had to learn zooarchaeology as well as bioarchaeology, and learn this whole aspect of archaeology with this special type of archaeology that I never would have had that opportunity had it not been Pat Watson. And it continued. I continued to work in caves long after that. I myself then taught the cave archaeology course. I had students who worked in that area. I was teaching for 3 years at Western Kentucky University and had many projects there. We built the second largest cave gate in the world on a project that was a cave that had mud glyphs that were still wet. You could still see the imprints of people's fingers. It was a remarkable opportunity. And from that, I ended up working in caves in Honduras. I worked in caves in Turkey. It was something that I never saw at the time where my life would go. And not just working with human bones and animal bones, but also working with the types of visual things, the geoglyphs that were left behind, and in some cases petroglyphs and pictographs.
Pictographs are paintings on rocks. A classic example would be cave paintings, such as the ones at Chauvet or Lascaux. Geoglyphs are a manipulation of the earth to create pictures, such as the Nazca lines in Peru, which are formed by moving rocks in the desert to create huge images that can only be seen from above. Petroglyphs are made by scratching or chipping into the rock surface to carve into the stone. There are many examples of these in the American Southwest.
And that led to a whole completely different kind of archaeology than anything else I'd ever done, because you don't know what people were thinking. You can only postulate. You can only make comparisons. And so it was a tactile kind of archaeology that you touched the past, yet you could never know exactly what they were thinking. And it was fascinating, and I still find it fascinating. Last summer, I had an opportunity to have a real actual vacation and did something I've wanted to do for years and years. I'd been to parts of Spain and France before, but I'd never been able to really see the big, famous painted caves, the Paleolithic painted caves. And since I'd worked on so many of these glyph projects, I really wanted to see these. And so I did. I did a pilgrimage, to France. Spent quite a bit of time in the Dordogne Valley, going to all the different caves that were open, including Lascaux 4, which is the facsimile of the Great Lascaux. And it's unlike anything I've ever experienced. So I'm glad I stuck with it.
While interviewing Professor Haskins, I had chills, remembering my own fascination with caves ignited by her assignment. I've hiked in the Andes, swam in the Amazon, got lost in Athens, but nothing has ever enchanted me quite like a cave.